afternoon and welcome to this long-awaited joint meeting of the Planning Commission and the City Council on October 24th. I'm going to give a little heads up for how this is going to run. Oh, you have to gavel in, sorry.
Hi. I'm going to repeat the same thing. Good afternoon. It's a joint meeting. I'm introducing Planning Commission, and we're here to joint meeting with the City Council and the Eugene Planning Commission. Welcome.
Great. So I'm just going to give you a little lay of the land before we begin. We're going to start with some introductions. Our planning staff is going to give you a little, Planning Commission 101 on how they function and how they relate to council. We'll have, then we'll open it up for discussion. The plan is to restrict you to 2 minutes on your rounds because there are so many around the table. 3 minutes would not give enough time. And the proposal is that as you listen to the discussion, that you think about the ways in which, the Planning Commission could better serve council. What are the challenges that you experience or the concerns that you face or that that we should discuss? And you have 2 minutes for that. And then we'll do a second round to talk about what are the solutions to some of those challenges. And so Kristen and I are going to keep 2 queues. I'll keep a queue of counselors and she'll keep a queue of commissioners, and we'll alternate, one starting with counselors, one counselor, then one commissioner, and we'll just go back and forth for each of those rounds. So that is the structure and the plan. And now we can, I want to say one other thing. The hoped for outcome here is that not only will we all have a better understanding of the work, but particularly council understand better how Planning Commission works and the structure. But secondly, that we would walk away with a short list of things that we think we want to see happen that would make that process work better, give you more information. It could be as simple as more of these meetings every year. So I'm hoping we'll walk away at the end with a few kind of immediate outcomes of things that we either want to change right away or that we want to explore for changing in the future. So that's the goal. And now I will turn it over to Kristen.
Hi. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce, the planning commissioners are going to introduce themselves. And there's 3 elements that you're going to introduce. 1, your name, vocation, and how long you've been on the Planning Commission. So I'll start. I'm Kristen Taylor. I'm currently the chair. My vocation is I work for TBG Architects and Planners. Time on the Planning Commission, this is my 5th year and 2nd term.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Ramey. I'm trained as an architect and currently practicing as a facilities planner and architect. And I've been on the commission for 2-3 months, maybe 4 months. Mm-hmm. It's going so fast.
My name is Lisa Fragola, and I'm a 2nd grade teacher at Adams Elementary. And I was appointed in June along with Commissioner Ramey.
My name is John Borofsky. I'm a restaurateur here in Eugene. I've been on the commission for, I think, 6 years now.
And I'm Bill Randall. I'm an architect here in town. I've been practicing since 1983. I've been on the commission, I think, the longest of any of us right now since, I think it was July 1, 2009.
Oh.
And this is my last year.
Okay, great. Thank you all and welcome. And I know that we're missing both. Alan Zelenka is calling in, I thought. Has he called in? Okay.
Haven't heard him get on the line.
Okay. And Mike has other commitment and will not be here. And do we know about Greg Evans? No. Okay, so maybe he'll show up. All right, that's excellent. So why don't I turn it over to you and you can take it away.
Great. Thank you all. My name is Alyssa Hansen, and I manage the current planning section. And I have with me Terry Harding, who manages our long-range planning. Robin Hostick, our planning director, was supposed to be giving this presentation today, but he's our fearless leader, and he was injured in a mountain biking accident. So Terry and I are pinch hitting for him today. If you wouldn't mind indulging us for just one tiny favor, though, I know he really wanted to be at this meeting, so what we want to do is take 2 seconds of your time and get a quick selfie of the table. So just really quick.
Get in here, Alyssa. There we go. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. So, I am going to be giving you an overview of the purpose and the role of the Planning Commission, and Terry's going to be providing you an overview of their current work program. And because our back is to it, I'm going to use this microphone so I can actually see the slides. All right, so as you well know, planning and land use can be very complex, and that's one of the main reasons that the Planning Commission exists. A big part of their job is to dig into the details of planning, to engage our community in that work, and to provide service and support to the council and to the community as a whole. The Planning Commission spends a lot of time every year working through these details, usually in one of two ways, either making recommendations to you, the council, on policies and regulations related to land use, or by deciding certain kinds of land use appeals. So in a big picture, they engage our community and support the council in making important land use decisions for our community. The Planning Commission is enabled by state statute that gives us, the city, the authority to have a planning commission. Our planning commission was established 93 years ago, back in 1925. That's pretty impressive. Chapter 2 actually includes all the functions and responsibilities. Those are defined in Chapter 2 of the land use, of the Eugene Code, not the Land Use Code. And we also have a set of bylaws that were adopted by the Planning Commission that are more specific in how they carry out the codes and the ordinances for their work. The Planning Commission has 3 main responsibilities. The first is a quasi-judicial role for certain land use applications. Typically those are appeals. Sometimes there are some site-specific code amendments or other plan amendments that come their way that eventually end up with you. It's called quasi-judicial because they kind of act like judges. It's not like, hey, is this a good idea or not? It's, does it meet the law? Their second main role is making official recommendations to council on policies and regulations related to land use, so this legislative role. Most biggest one I can think of recently would be the UGB adoption package. They did a lot of work on that before it came to council. And then their third role is serving as the city's committee for citizen involvement. And I'm just going to cover each of those 3 roles real quick. So in terms of the quasi-judicial process, as I mentioned, that's kind of being judge-like on certain land use applications. For the most part, the Planning Commission does this for appeals of hearings officials' decisions, such as zone changes, conditional use permits, planned unit developments. Again, the hearings official makes the initial decision, and then on appeal, if appealed, they go to the Planning Commission for the final local decision. And in this role, the Planning Commission weighs the evidence considered by the hearings official and weighs those against the approval criteria from the Land Use Code and any adopted policies and plans. Again, it's not about whether or not they think it's a good idea, it's whether or not it meets our land use regulations. These applications don't come to the planning or to the city council, but I know some of you hear from your constituents about them from time to time. Other quasi-judicial decisions that the Planning Commission is involved in are less common, but there are some code amendments that are site-specific. Edison parking, I think you were all involved in, well, almost all of you. And then if there's a metro plan or say a neighborhood plan amendment that's site-specific. The other thing about quasi-judicial is that they have very prescribed timelines and process. And so that is really a differentiation between those and legislative, which is what I'm going to talk about next. So again, the second role of the Planning Commission is to serve in the legislative role. And this would be for land use code updates, such as clear and objective that we're working on right now. It could be for a refinement plan. River Road Santa Clara will be going through something similar to this. And again, the UGB adoption process went through this particular process. So first, any changes to our land use code or adopted plans must be initiated by City Council. So first step, always City Council initiation. Generally, that involves a motion to direct staff to start the work, and then sometimes council also sets a timeline for when that work should be completed. And in rare cases, such as with the accessory dwelling units, we're given a deadline by state or by the federal government. Once the project is scoped out and their funding is in place, the Planning Commission reviews the project charter and the public involvement plan, and staff makes adjustments if needed before the Planning Commission approves the plan. The City Council saw a number of our public involvement plans earlier this year. I know that we came to you with urban reserves and clear and objective, and I think maybe some others, but those also went through the Planning Commission, who ultimately approved them. And then they help us implement those public involvement plans as the project unfolds. They hear periodic updates from staff. They're involved in key points to give feedback. Most of the larger projects either have subcommittees or project resources, which the Planning Commission plays a role on. And planning commissioners also regularly attend project-related public events. So they're really deeply involved in a lot of the public involvement for our projects. And then to continue on with the legislative process, that all culminates in a planning commission public hearing, which is a formal hearing similar to city council hearings. And then following that, the planning commission deliberates and makes a formal recommendation to council. This usually takes multiple meetings. I know we had a record number, I think, with the urban growth boundary. And often the Planning Commission will attach comments or suggestions to council regarding that upcoming decision. And then after that is when City Council begins the formal adoption process, which is, again, a public hearing, deliberations, and action. And typically, there's not a formal deadline for council or Planning Commission to make these decisions unless we've been directed so by either council or the state or the. All right, so moving on to the Planning Commission's third role, and that's as our Citizen Involvement Committee. So statewide planning goal number 1 calls for each city in Oregon to have a recognized committee for citizen involvement. This is really about comprehensive planning, changes we make to our land use regulations. And in 2004, the City Council designated the Planning Commission as the city's recognized Citizen Involvement Committee. This was done through an amendment to Chapter 2 in the Eugene Code. So the Planning Commission fulfills all the requirements of the Citizen Involvement Committee. They regularly advise staff on citizen involvement. As an example, nearly all of the major planning projects underway are now guided by a public involvement plan. The Planning Commission reviewed each of these, advised us on revisions, and ultimately approved them. They also comment on public involvement during the course of projects, advise us on potential changes and additions as needed. They also participate in direct engagement quite often, as I mentioned, especially for the larger projects. They regularly hear from folks during public comment at the beginning of their meetings, sometimes attend our open houses and public forums to listen and observe. So just a couple of weeks ago, we had several planning commissioners at our Clear and Objective working groups, and we also had a couple of them at our planning project fair. Let's see. And for instance, we also have several that serve as project resources on River Road Santa Clara and other projects as well. So needless to say, they are highly engaged in our projects. They also spend a lot of time with us. Over the past year, usually we have about 26 meetings, 2 a month, sometimes more. Over 1,000 hours of volunteer activity, and included within those meetings are 4 to 5 appeal hearings plus deliberations meetings on those. So in terms of just legal and policy framework, the Planning Commission talks a lot about the basis for its discussions and its decision making, and I know that they don't take their jobs lightly at all. For all of their decisions, they're required to uphold applicable laws and regulations, and that's particularly important again for the quasi-judicial role. They also, for the more legislative projects, they follow council's adopted policies and direction. They consider the pillars of Envision Eugene, the triple bottom line, and they think about the whole community, not just their neighborhood, but how does this impact the whole community? And they bring in their different perspectives for that. With that, I am going to turn it over to Terry.
Thank you. So my piece is going to go over the Planning Commission's work plan, which was attached to your AIS. So in your memo, there was a short list of past projects, including area plans, code updates, things that Alyssa's talked about. However, as you know, the bulk of the city's planning work for quite a few years has focused on creating a durable vision through Envision Eugene, adopting a new urban growth boundary, and a portion of our Eugene-specific comprehensive plan. The Envision Eugene recommendation from 2012 also contained a ton of guidance for how to implement the vision, especially since our community and council wanted a plan that was action-oriented. So that's been guiding our work for a number of years. This spreadsheet or table was also attached to your materials, and this is a copy of our actual planning team work plan, a lot of which involves the Planning Commission. It's split up into two main areas of work. So I know you can't read it on the slide, but it is attached to your materials and is on our website. The first kind of area of work is ongoing programs and projects, and these include things like providing assistance to the public, land use application review, staffing the Planning Commission, hearings official and historic review board, and state and regional coordination. And it's the bulk of what Alyssa's team does on a daily basis. The second category is Envision Eugene implementation, which includes citywide growth management work, neighborhood and area planning, and urban design. And the bulk of this work is either mandated by the state or directed by the city council. There's not a lot of room in this amount of work for special projects or things to be added on top of what we're already required or directed to be doing. So a closer look at some of the active planning projects is here. A lot of these, as I just mentioned, include heavy involvement by the Planning Commission. 9 of these projects are listed here, particularly involved projects that are underway right now include the Clear and Objective Approval Criteria Update, Urban Reserves Planning, Growth Monitoring, and the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood and Corridor Plans, among others, but those are the 4 biggies at the top. And we also provided a link to our annual report in your materials that goes through a little bit more detail about what's been going on over the last year. This list is also in addition to other projects that come up during the year, just to be responsive to conditions in the community. So Alyssa already mentioned the parking at Edison School. It just came up. We figured it out and dealt with it, complying with the ADU legislation, the Housing Tools and Strategies Project, which is currently ongoing, and a number of other things. And of course, also handling any appeals that come up during the land use review process, which does include a lot of communication and coordination with the Planning Commission. Just another view of our projects. We've heard quite a few questions about how different projects relate to one another and how the timelines overlap. And the project fair Alyssa mentioned a moment ago was an event that we held to try to give people an opportunity to learn about multiple projects in one place. We've also put information about all these projects on our website, so if you couldn't come to the meeting, you can go there, learn about things, what the work is about, what the timelines look like, and importantly, how you can get involved as a community member. So I encourage you to check out the website if you're interested in any of these projects or how they relate to other high priority work the council is doing. In terms of active land use review projects, some of the bigger land use applications the Planning Commission has deliberated on recently include the Lombard Apartments and the Capitol Hill Plan Unit Development. Those are both at LUBA presently. The University of Oregon North Campus is expected to come soon. And they'll also be working on code updates to implement the Downtown Riverfront Master Plan. In addition to those, we schedule regular updates between project teams and the council to keep you all informed about what's going on. For instance, River Road has been periodically coming back and letting the council know how that plan is going, because you wanted us to do that, and it's very helpful to the project to keep checking in and getting your direction. And that, I think, is the end of staff's presentation, and I'll throw the discussion questions to the mayor.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm opening up for council. Are there counselors who want to be in the queue just yet? I'll just kick it off by thanking you for these materials, and the piece that I found incredibly illuminating was actually this attachment B, the work plan with all of those specific pieces, because I don't think I didn't have all that in my head, and I find this tool so helpful that I guess, that's one of the takeaways for me, is that this tool is useful to me, and hopefully we'll hear from other counselors and others whether that's useful to you. I have Betty in the queue, so take it away, Betty.
Thank you. I have two things I wanted to ask about. Well, ask. I appreciate it when we get a minority report on anything. And I would appreciate also the reasons. If at any time there is disagreement as to what should be done, I would appreciate the reasons from the majority and the minority. But I think it's really important to have the minority represented anytime there's a report on anything. And then the other thing I'm really concerned about is a citizen involvement committee, which we used to have. And I know that it was a cost-cutting thing, I think. One of those, I think, unneeded and unwise cost-cutting things. We used to have a citizen involvement committee that was comprised of some people from the voters list and some people from neighborhoods and some people from the council. And I think that was their sole business, was citizen involvement, to look at. And I think we should have that committee again. Then someone decided we couldn't afford it anymore. And then they said, well, the planning commission can do that. And in my opinion, the planning commission probably had enough to do without that. And one of the things we did in addition to what you mentioned there was, whenever there was a citizens committee, it went to the citizen involvement committee for their approval or their comments before it was finalized. So they might say, maybe that you have too many representatives from this group, or did you think of getting some other kind of person on there? So I think that was a really useful thing that committee did. And also it's got some people involved in caring about government. And one's chosen from the voters list who just, at random, there would be 2 people who were chosen like that. And they would learn a lot about government, and after that they would care a lot more and maybe get involved in something else and maybe talk to other people who would care more. So I think it was a really good committee, and I would like to see it reinstated. And I've said that many times to no avail so far, but I'll say it once more. Thank you.
Are there any planning commissioners that have a question, comment? Commissioner Randall.
Related to that or separately? Just
Can be separate.
okay. I think one thing is I've been thinking about our connection with council that I would appreciate. I know a lot of times we have a liaison to different committees like the Sustainability Commission and those sorts of things. And yet we don't seem to have a liaison for council to Planning Commission and vice versa. And it seems like, especially related to legislative issues, I think quasi-judicial probably isn't needed or appropriate. But with a legislative issue, to be able to have a counselor that could come to our meetings and be the liaison, and vice versa, a commissioner coming to council to be the liaison, I think would really help bridge some of that communication and would be just a real beneficial way of us communicating. And I know, Mayor, you mentioned maybe either having these sorts of meetings more often. Maybe we wouldn't have to have these sorts of meetings as often if we had that bridge to be able to go back and forth. And so that would be something I would advocate for.
Okay. I have Claire in the queue.
Thank you. So first, I just want to thank all of you serving on the Planning Commission. I know you do an incredible amount of work and really important work on behalf of the community and also to inform the decisions we make at council, and it's very much appreciated by this councilor. So I have one question that's a little specific and not necessarily addressing the question there, but I don't recall in the moving ahead updates, I didn't recognize that the Planning Commission was engaged in that process. And I'd love to hear just a little bit more about the Planning Commission's work with the moving ahead.
Well, we have a sounding board, the Moving Ahead Sounding Board, and there are 3 of us, I think, with 1 alternate that regularly will attend those meetings. And so we're just part of that process. Again, it's, I think, more similar to the liaison idea where we can then report back and give that bridge of communication for moving ahead as well.
Right?
So Claire, I wanted to add to that is that actually the Planning Commission and what we can do is have staff forward to City Council the list of all the subcommittees. So what we do is we have breakout subcommittees where we're either concentrating on citizen involvement, so it's not done at the larger meeting. There is a subcommittee and that will come back to the larger group, but we're also then participating in various technical advisory groups or other initiatives through the City of Eugene that's been that's come from City Council. But we aren't just sitting at the main meetings. We actually have other committees we're involved in.
You're doing a lot of work. Yeah. Well, thank you. And getting that list of subcommittees would help round out my understanding of all the tasks that you are undertaking. And I'll be honest, I don't remember, Betty, bringing up the fact that we'd had a standing citizen involvement committee before. You know, we have set up ad hoc committees such as the River Guides, which I think have been very helpful in that particular project with the riverfront development. And maybe it is time for us to think about if we have the resources to reinstate a freestanding citizen involvement committee and take some of that workload off of the Planning Commission and spread it around a little bit. I think Betty made some good points. And I appreciate the idea of a liaison. I will say it would be a real challenge for a counselor to add 2 additional meetings to their meeting list unless they were, you know, not on 2 other committees, because between us all, we have at least 2 to 3 other extra meetings that we attend for those committees that we're assigned to. So I'm not dismissing it out of hand, but we would just need to think about the practical way to do that.
Okay. Any questions, comments from Planning Commission?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So a couple of things that I think is important to bring to council is, one of the things was mentioned, in some of the quasi-judicial things that we're involved with, you guys hear a lot about it. You know, you look up there, you see Capitol Hill PUD, you hear Gordon Hotels, you know, some of these things that are quasi-judicial that we're deciding on, but you guys get the phone calls. Right? It's like, how can you build this up on the top of Capitol Hill when you've got this and this and this and this, and you need to do something about it. And I think a good example, you guys kind of got a good example of what we go through in these hearings when you had the Measure 49 claim. Okay, it was very similar. You look at something and you say, well, this makes sense. It really should be done this way, right? But then you look at the statutes and you look at the code, and you have to dig down into it and say, does this criteria, do this project meet this criteria? And we have to look at that. That's what we're bound by. And a lot of times that doesn't go the way that certain people that are appealing it. Obviously, if it's an appeal, there's 2 different sides. One person's going to be happy, one person's not going to be happy. But we're tasked with looking at the record, which sometimes is thousands of pages long. Capitol Hill PUD was over 4,000 pages of record that we have to dig through, and they're pulling things out. And I mean, for some of it's half an hour just to figure out if we can look at it. But those are what we're dealing with. And so when you get those calls if you can kind of say, you know, I hear what you're saying, but there's certain criteria that the planning commission had to meet. Because it's not like we're trying to dig against a neighborhood or whatever. We have to see those codes. And I think you guys got a good example of that with that 49. I think a lot of you thought, gosh, let's build this, but then, well, you know, it says this. So just wanted to give you that little bit of take.
Chris?
Thank you. In 2 minutes, the first thing is just to thank you for the incredible amount of work that you do. I mean, I admire it all the time. I'm always looking for a couple of ideas that I really want to express so it gives an idea of what my interests are and what would be good for me. And I talk a lot in other meetings about the desire for clarity and how the Planning Commission can help us to achieve greater clarity on any issue. And that clarity often comes from a function of you deep diving into an issue, reading those 4,000 pages so that you can help us to understand clearly what's at stake and what's going on. And I think part of that clarity is also a function of what are the alternative points of view. Betty mentions minority reports. It's not necessarily that it's a minority report or majority report. It's what are all of the opinions about a particular point of view. So we don't just hear one, we can hear all the diversity of points of view on it. So whether it's formal or informal, it's nice to kind of know how the discussion was, just for the sake of clarity. And that gets to the notion of engagement with the broader community and how engagement, whether you have a committee or whether you come up with subcommittees, but there has to be some sort of a process where you can have a broader diversity of the community engaged in whatever it is you're doing. Whether it's through a committee structure or whether it's through some other system. I know that this is something Terry thinks a lot of as a result of the Envision Eugene process. And then the last thing, extremely important for me, is the notion of what are the consequences of the policies and the decisions we make. Because it's easy to think, well, I make this decision and it's done. But every single decision, every decision that your body and our body makes has a consequence. And I need to know what those consequences will be, either in terms of the law or in terms of the public or in terms of the overall benefit of the community. And that's where you can help me enormously, is through that clarity and understanding what all the consequences are for what our decisions are going to be.
Planning commissioners? Yeah, Commissioner Fragola.
So, a little bit closer to the mic. Our roles are really different in some ways in terms of we're appointed to make decisions for the entire community, right? So we don't have constituents that will vote for us or elect us. You all have constituents that are going to vote for you, elect you, or possibly even unelect you, right? So that puts different pressures on the council than it does to the commission. But I feel like we are going through some incredible changes in the city. When you look at that work plan and when you look at the way that the city is going to grow, there's so many intersections, right? And whatever the consequences and the outcomes are, there's going to be a lot of intersections and relationships that happen. I feel like when we make decisions as a planning commission, because we're thinking outside of the impact of constituents voting for us, we have a different role that we play. But we need to know that we have a relationship with the city council for us to be able to do that role effectively, and understand that, you know, you have different pressures on you. But when we do dive deep into an issue and we're thinking about the entire city, it might not be particularly popular what the outcomes are with just one part of the city, right? And so how do we work together as a commission? Because I'm talking about the challenges we face, right?
Counselor Evans or Semple, anybody? Yay, Semple? Okay, there you go, Emily. Oh, you are on my list, sorry. I see you.
Thank you. Thank you for presentation, and big thank you to the commission, because I do realize it's an incredible number of meetings. I did go to a meeting, I think in the spring or winter, on a subject I was very interested in, and I also felt that the commission really needed a liaison, to the point that I volunteered to be it. But when I talked to city attorney and the mayor, it turned out because of the quasi-judicial decisions, we cannot have a counselor on as a liaison. So that's a disappointment, but we are allowed to go attend the meetings that aren't quasi-judicial, and I have to say that I have not done that after my disappointment. But I think we should. The other thing is I'd really like to have a more extensive application process. We use exactly the same process as we do for our other commissions, and it's very brief. You answer some questions, some people are short about it, some people are extensive, and then you come and give us a 2-minute, memorized speech that basically says what you already wrote us. So I don't think that's enough for a commission that has this much power. You meet a lot, you get a lot of information, and we really need you. And this is absolutely nothing against anybody on the commission. I think you work really hard. But I also think it's our responsibility to the community to be a little more in depth. I would not use this process to hire someone for a job. So I think it should be more, especially the interview part. How do you respond to questions? What are some specific things that your opinions are about? So I'd like to see a change in that. Thanks.
Planning commissioners? I can put myself in the queue. I wanted to, Emily, I agree with you in terms of the interview process. The other thing that I think the planning commissioners, it's a technical advisory board. So there needs to be a level of expertise coming in, at least from some of the participants, because of how the quasi-judicial process, I'll highlight that one in particular, but there's some similarities with legislative. It's challenging, and it's a lot to learn. So I do agree with you that I don't necessarily look at it as power. I look at it as responsibility. It's a huge responsibility, and it is an at-large volunteer job that is serious, and there are implications. So really understanding the code, understanding the planning process, understanding statewide planning, understanding how planning works from statewide to comprehensive to refinement plan to the code. It's important. So it's not, it would be very challenging to have a committee that wasn't vetted for just the capacity to show up in that realm. The other thing is that we talk about this, and we have talked about this, is how can we as a committee be more effective in the decision-making process to support city council? Because other than quasi-judicial, a lot of the decisions or a lot of the direction is coming from city council. So that's really, we want to use our time wisely. And we want to be effective to you. So thank you for taking the time today to share that. It's really important to us.
Council, any councilors wanting another round? Okay, I'll do a second cue, but I'll just insert myself in the round here. I would be interested, as we go around, to hear the commission talk a little bit more about. We floated the idea of changing the Citizen Involvement Committee, and I think that's a major topic that would take some major conversations. But I would be interested in how the commissioners see that. We're suggesting as a council that a separate committee might be helpful to them, but I actually would be interested to hear what the commissioners think of that before we, launch into that as potentially a good idea. So just throw that one out there, and I guess I'll leave it with that, putting that on the table.
Commissioner Ramey.
Thank you, Kristen. So I noted that in opening that I was a newcomer to the commission, and so I don't have the depth of experience that the other commissioners have, and I don't want to chew up a lot of time. However, I have noticed one thing that I thought was extremely not expected for me, having grown up in Eugene and been in planning for most of my professional career. There is this disconnect in the 7 pillars between strong and vital neighborhoods and increasing density. And so what that creates is not unexpected, I suppose, conflict between the neighborhoods and those who are trying to, create more density. Sometimes it's staff, sometimes it's developers. Unfortunately, and I think that's just the way it is, and that's why we have a commission to sort of sort out those issues. But what I noticed that was shocking was the lack of polite discourse around some of the issues. And I know that none of us particularly are treating each other that way. We're all very polite. But there are members of the community, and we probably all experience them from time to time, who really don't act in ways that are polite. And this is really not effective in their approach to anybody, commissions or city councils. And with the issues of free speech, that comes with the territory. Community building is messy. But I do think there are moments in the process where we could sort of gently remind people that, well, maybe that's not the way to behave. And there's certainly moments offline where if we meet these people in community situations that are not formal, where we could reinforce that kind of behavior. And so as a newcomer, not expected that there's conflict, that's good. Community building requires that to some degree, but not really ready to understand how that was being expressed by some individuals, so vitriolic and sort of personal attacks on people in the process that were really not helpful, and then making everybody in the audience go, well, I don't want to be a part of that. So how we can work together to work on that issue would be good.
Yes, Emily.
Thank you. I think it would be fascinating to know a little bit more about what you do, because we don't have a liaison and we have a lot of things to pay attention to. So I wonder if, since we're here, if you would mind just telling me 2 or 3 of the things that you found especially interesting to work on or especially effective, and why you like being on the commission.
Commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Borowski.
So I'm not answering that question because I've got something else that I wanted to talk about.
Switch the clock back.
Yes, okay. So you all know that there's going to be a lot of things that are going to interact between Planning Commission and yourselves in the coming year. You've given the staff a very extensive work plan, and we all know about the housing issues that we're going to be going forward with. Having been on the commission during the South Willamette, I don't want to say,
Debacle.
well, I won't say it that way, the South Willamette process, I think everybody learned a lot from that. One of the things that I learned as a takeaway from that was that we may make a recommendation to you. And that's kind of really when the public sees it. It comes before you guys, and then the public sees it, and you get a room full of people standing up at your public hearings and stuff. I think that for me, if there's issues with the recommendation that the Planning Commission has sent to you, it's very appropriate for you to send it back to us for more work, rather than trying to legislate land use code in a 45-minute work session. Because I've seen how that goes, and it doesn't go well. Writing code while you're sitting at this table or with notes from people that have directed you from your neighborhood or whatever, I don't think is the best way to write code. And so if you guys are getting a bunch of pushback on something that we've recommended to you, and you say, wait a second, this is minority report stuff, right? You didn't hear that. It's definitely appropriate for you guys to say, Planning Commission, take this back and have another look at it and bring it back to us again, rather than writing these things on the fly, because I think that that's something we are empowered to do, to give you our best recommendations and to take the 2 or 3 meetings to dig into those processes so that we can come back with a better recommendation.
Claire?
Thank you for that thoughtful comment, John. That's very good advice, and I will take it to heart. I had a couple of questions, maybe for staff. So was that citizen involvement committee that Councillor Taylor referred to specifically for land use issues, or was it used more broadly? Greg seems to know the answer.
I served on that committee years ago. No, it wasn't used for land use. It was used in the general context of citizen involvement throughout the city in a number of boards and commissions, and how citizens got involved and interacted with the city on a whole different range of issues and levels. So the Planning Commission, and I served on the Planning Commission before too, was strictly focused on land use.
And not citizen involvement.
And not citizen involvement.
Great, that's very helpful. And,
Can I just clarify that the citizen involvement function that the Planning Commission serves currently is strictly land use?
I assumed that,
got it.
yeah.
It was, citizen involvement was much broader.
And then to the suggestion that Councillor Semple made about having a more robust process for Planning Commission applicants, I think that is worth looking into. But is there any legal prohibition against us making a more robust process for one of our commissions versus our other boards and commissions? And then, I also appreciate the comments of Commissioner Ramey. I think you pointed out a major conflict area for our future plan in terms of our policy direction regarding the need to develop more densely so that we don't sprawl out into our farm land and open spaces. I actually think this council needs to provide leadership on how we as a community reconcile those apparently competing principles. I personally do not believe that developing more densely automatically leads to a diminishment of neighborhood livability. I live in a very densely populated neighborhood in Whitaker, and it's a very livable neighborhood. And so I think there are ways that this council needs to step up more obviously in trying to demonstrate for the community that we can actually meet those two principles together. But we do need to be able to come together and speak to each other in a civilized manner as we engage in that process. And I absolutely agree that tolerating personal attacks is completely unhelpful and does not lead to any kind of constructive engagement.
Commissioner Randall.
I do want to answer Councillor Semple's question that she had earlier as far as, the whole idea of being on the commission. And I've got probably a little longer time to look back on as far as my terms, I guess, on the commission. And I think I came into it thinking, I'm going to make all these, be a part of making all these great sweeping changes in our community and making our community better and the whole thing. And fairly quickly realized that all those changes come incrementally and in small parts and pieces. And once I got my mind around that, if I leave this commission and have been a part of a few incremental changes that have made our community better, then I'm going to count that as a success. And, I think, us collectively in our community making some of those incremental changes for the better, I think will be, make Eugene better than it has been in the past. And so I think that's kind of why I've stayed on the commission and why I, feel good about my term and what we've done as a commission. So that's why I do this. You're welcome.
Great. Other counselors wanting another round? There you go.
Might be for staff, but some of the planning commissioners were talking about all the technical things that they have to deal with, and I'm wondering, is there some type of training or orientation that we provide to support these folks who are willing to step up?
Is my mic on? Yes. Yes, we do pretty extensive training with new planning commissioners. We have a binder that Alyssa and her team have put together with different resources, both local and state-based. So yeah, we do that, and this year we had 3 new ones, so did it together with the 3 of them. We also provide legal training, mostly for their quasi-judicial role.
Great, thank you.
Commissioners. So I'll put myself in the queue again in terms of participation. One of the things I would love to encourage, and I think City Council can help play a role in this, is encourage the public, citizens, to show up at meetings before a hearing. So before the Planning Commission hearing, before the City Council hearing. So I definitely know there are certain stakeholder groups that actually understand the process and are fairly strategic and will wait to go to City Council to actually present testimony. It is a strategy. So what I'd love to do is, if City Council hears concern or ideas about a certain subject matter that's in front of the Planning Commission, even if it's 3 years in advance, to encourage them to come and speak, because it's amazing to me, and I shouldn't say amazing because people have busy lives, right? Is that we have meetings, many meetings before we actually are sitting before a hearing and sitting before public testimony, where there's opportunities for the public to actually shape what a decision is, or how a code, for instance, if we just take the example of writing code, clear and objective standards, and right now there's a public process occurring, there's also going to be opportunity for the public to attend Planning Commission meetings, even the hearing prior to the City Council hearing, and we don't actually have a lot of people show up. So I'd love to encourage that. And I think maybe the public doesn't necessarily know they have those opportunities, or there could be, there's probably a whole host of reasons, don't have the time. But if you hear about it beforehand and it's not yet in front of you, encourage them to come to Planning Commission, or let us know. If it's not quasi-judicial, let us know and we can follow up with them. Because like I said, I'd love to see that participation beforehand more actively.
Mayor, this is Alan. Can I get in queue?
Please, go for it right now.
Oh, well, exactly on that point. I'm wondering, you guys have probably thought about this more on the Planning Commission, but one of the things I've been struggling with over the last couple of years, and the South of Willamette is a great example, is the doing just a minimum outreach and public notice on issues of land use that affect people's property and doesn't seem to be sufficient. So we have people that we've been working on processes for a long time, 25 meetings, and working on it for a year, maybe longer. And then when it comes down to close to decision time, it's the first time they've heard about it, and they come in and they say, well, wait a minute, why are you ramrodding this through? But the process has been going on a long time, but there hasn't been a way for them to get engaged or notified, and I'm wondering what you guys' thoughts about that are in terms of going beyond just what the minimum requirements are, but more actively engaging on land use issues that impact people's properties and lives a lot more than other kinds of decisions that we make at the city.
Staff or Planning Commission?
Yeah. Planning Commission, I mean, I've talked to staff about this already, but I'm curious what you guys think of the Planning Commission. Go ahead, Kristen.
Okay, want to make sure I'm not cutting the queue if somebody else wants to respond? No. So, Alan, it's definitely been a focus in my tenure of Planning Commission is, the Willamette Special Area Study was definitely one where we and staff took extra time and effort to look at what were the challenges, what happened here, because it was a long process. It was 7 years or 5 years. So to have people show up, the public show up and say this is the first time they've heard it, I mean, we don't want that. So I think public involvement in public process is challenging. And I do find that we spend a lot of time focusing on it, or like I said, during my tenure, and I think staff does a very good job. Can we do better? Yes. Can we figure out how to get to people? But there's moments that I think maybe the only way is to go to their door. And even going to the door, they might not open it. Like the other day, I had someone come to my door, my dogs were barking, I didn't open it. So that's a choice I made. So I think also us as representative, both City Council and Planning Commission, being able to actually be educated and informed about what that process is and to let them know rather than saying, this is the first time I've heard, to be able to say, well, let's double check and make sure you're on the list, and to find out that sometimes they are on the list and they've thrown away the mail. So there's limitations to what we can do. And like I said, can we do more? Yes. Can we be more informed to let people know here are the opportunities? Here's what's happened already. And if they are willing and able and want to go that extra effort, a planning commission, I'm willing to meet with them. I'm willing to make that commitment. It's also needs to be that others are being accountable and stepping forward to wanting to be involved. So I think it's a complicated challenge, and I do want to give accolades to staff. There's been a Bleicher method training that has happened every year. Planning Commission's invited. It's all about the discussion and your questions, Alan. It's how do we get more people involved? How do we avoid, or how do we make sure that that person doesn't show up and say, I've heard nothing, and it's been a 7-year process? So it's a great question, and I think us working together to try to figure out what can we do more or differently. Yeah.
I have Chris in the queue, but I just wanted to jump in on that, sort of not a complete answer to that, but just a thought about that is, I said how much I liked this work plan, and I'm just wondering for council's thoughts about if we had a more regular sort of update on what is currently on Planning Commission's desk for that month, so that if there's something in your ward, I mean, we're not tracking these things on a regular basis, so that at least as council, we have a heads up. Maybe that's an opportunity for us at least to be more on top of where the Planning Commission is in their decision-making processes, and if there's something that we think is going to have a particular impact, then when you're all going to neighborhood meetings, you're aware that this particular issue is on Planning Commission, and you can provide your neighborhood with a sort of heads up like, oh, by the way, this is the next step in the River Road process or whatever. So just a thought that there could be a role in which just not an involved thing, but even some version of this work plan, which is a date thing that says for the month of, or for the quarter, whatever, however fine tuning it is, for the month of January, these are the Planning Commission meetings, these are the neighborhoods that are going to be, you don't have to be a fine filter, but just a thought, so.
Yeah, Mayor,
Yeah.
I think I saw a little bit more time. I was going to make 2 points in response.
Sorry.
Sorry, Alan.
Yeah, that's okay. One of them was the point that you just made, which is more regular communication. I've been beating that drum for a very long time. We don't need to have 45 minutes or 90 minutes with each commission. If we could do a quarterly check back with each commission, maybe they send us an update on what they're doing. I know that sounds like make work, but I think it would be very useful to people. It's better if it were done in person verbally. Add an agenda, maybe 15 minutes, and do 3 at a time. But if we did that not only for the Planning Commission, but all of our commissions, I think the councils would be better informed of what's going on. The second point I wanted to make is that I realize that some of this stuff has been ongoing in the trainings and stuff like that, but I think we need to actually change what we're thinking about and think a little bit more out of the box in terms of the lessons learned from the South Alignment and other kinds of processes where people felt like they didn't hear about this stuff. And to those people, what we do doesn't work. And so we need to think about a different way of communicating, maybe the stuff that you were talking about, Kristen, but a different way of getting that information out and going out to people as opposed to just sending them a postcard as a gross oversimplification of what we do, that we need to work on, because if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to keep getting the same results, which is people are going to keep saying the same thing, which is, I didn't hear about this until you were shoving it down my throat. Okay, now I'm done.
You're sure you have 22 seconds?
All right, I have Chris Chris, did you have and then Claire again.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. And interestingly, this joint meeting with the Planning Commission and the City Council has really begun to evolve into a conversation about engagement, because the Planning Commission and the City Council are probably the two groups who have the most at stake in terms of engaging with the community on the decisions we make. So I think it's an appropriate topic. And it seems you can just set up mechanisms, and those mechanisms still won't work right because you don't have a culture of engagement. And I think having a culture or an orientation towards good engagement is critical to being able to make any system you want to set up work. And that culture internally is where we actually appreciate and desire input, where we actively look for it because it's somehow going to benefit the processes and not create a lot of pain and suffering for us, which is kind of the paradigm we have now. Is if I go out to solicit input, it's painful, and we tend to avoid pain. And part of the culture of engagement on the outside is people who are going to engage need to engage in a civil and a respectful way so it doesn't create pain. Too much of the engagement that I see now is confrontive and adversarial. And I think good engagement is collaborative and cooperative. And so we need to figure out how we can internally change our systems to promote cooperation, and at the same time work to try to create more of a culture within the people who come to us or who are engaged, that they don't just want to come to scream and yell at us. They want to come to actually constructively work on something. And I think there's ways to do it. You don't have to legislate civility, but I think there are ways you can create more civility. And I think that's the only way we're going to make engagement work, is if we can encourage it in a way, in a culture that says, if we do this cooperatively, if we do this collaboratively, we can get a whole lot more done than if you come and yell at me and I yell at you and then nothing gets done.
I have Commissioner Fragola.
Yeah, I also had some thoughts about the whole engagement piece. So I do think there are things we could be doing better, and there are things that we're doing really well. There's, I think, first of all, an important understanding that what's going to work for one part of the city isn't going to work for another part of the city. It's incredibly complex in that way. We've had fantastic participation and engagement in the River Road area, right? I sit in that work group and have been participating in that process, and it's amazing the work the community is doing out there, right? It's really inspiring. What worked out there may not work for a part of the city like, the Fan area neighborhood or for ABC, right? So we need to look at what works in different communities. But I agree, I think we need to go out into the community. And we've seen things be successful, like the van going out and talking to people about the transportation projects and park projects. So that was incredibly successful. So there are things we know we can do. I think, though, it takes an investment of resources to be able to do that. And I've heard people say here today that a citizen involvement committee was cut due to cost cutting, right? And so we're looking at huge projects, that are going to be decided on in the next couple of years. And I definitely think it makes sense to take the time up front to invest in the public engagement, because I feel like when people are engaged early on, they feel like they've had a better chance to participate in the process. And I don't think we can do the level of engagement that we might all like to see without really investing in it. I think our planning department is already doing a great job, but they also have a huge amount on their plate. So.
Claire.
So Alan mentioned out-of-the-box thinking, and it just occurred to me as one potential brainstorm idea of yet another way to inform the public that there are opportunities for involvement is, the idea of an electronic reader board. We've got a big sign outside the Holt Center that we use to advertise performing arts. And I wonder if there would have been more recognition of a process happening on South Willamette if we'd had a mobile reader board parked on the corner of 30th and Willamette that said planning process in progress, learn more here.
Better pay attention.
Yeah, you know, it would have been a visual impact to people who live in that neighborhood, and it's not necessarily something that would work in every place, but it would be an additional avenue to flag for people that there is something going on in their neighborhood that they might want to learn about. So it just suddenly occurred to me while we were sitting here, and I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Good idea, as long as it's not driving around.
Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. So again, I'm going to veer us off, but it might bring us back to some sort of accountability. Again, I'm looking forward onto all these projects that are going to be coming before us and before you guys in the coming year or two. It's quite extensive, and I want to make sure that we can give you the best information that you have to work with, and that we can get the best information from you guys as to what you want us to work on. Again, I'm going back to Envision Eugene and back to South Willamette. And I think for us, clear direction from the council along the way is very important. And in the past, it has been, staff may bring a presentation to you and say, this is what we're doing on River Road, or this is what we're doing on some of the housing strategies or wherever we're at, growth monitoring, whatever. And they'll do the presentation and you guys will ask your questions, and then they'll be, okay, do you want us to continue on in this direction? And it'll be kind of head nods, right? But then as the rubber hits the road, it's like, whoa, let's back up on that. And so for me, I saw in Envision Eugene benchmarks where actual motions were made by you guys saying, this is the direction I want staff to go forward with. And then you're not revisiting that again and again, 1 year later, 2 years later, 3 years later. Well, no, I want to look at the housing mix number. Oh, I want to look, no, we've looked at that and we've given you the direction so that we're not going back, so that we're getting clear direction from you as to the direction you want to get information from us on.
Clarity?
Well, you brought it up early on as clarity. So if you want clarity from us, it's also important for us to get clarity from you as to the direction you want us working.
Greg.
I think that what we have here and what we seem to be talking around and avoiding is that there are people in this community and all communities across the country who practice strategic ignorance. They know what's going on, and there are some people who are truly out of the loop. I won't, deny that, but there are people who are clearly watching these processes go on, and when it's their time to do their bomb throwing and become bullies, we quite often exceed or adhere to bullies shaking their finger in our faces and saying, you can't move forward on this because you didn't check with me, or that I don't like the answer that I'm being given here. And I think that, quite frankly, it pretends to hold a larger portion of our community hostage, if you will, and I'll call it what it is, hold us hostage from making the kinds of community decisions that are necessary to move forward. This is why things take 5, 7, 10 years, is because we're always coming back and saying, okay, well, we didn't touch this issue or this person or that issue, and we didn't do this thoroughly enough. Quite frankly, I think staff does an excellent job, is very thorough, and does the best outreach that they possibly can, and does look for other angles and other ways of doing outreach and involving all the voices that need to be involved at the table. Our problem is being able to move forward and understand that some people are not going to be happy.
Planning commissioners. So I can put myself in the queue. So in terms of participation, thank you. Thank you. And Chris, earlier, I like the idea of starting internally. And that is one of the things we've talked about in terms of really our objective today is what can we do to work together more collaboratively to model that. So some of the participation, for instance, a decision's made by city council and there's a timeline. Understand that with that timeline, there's a work plan that looks like this. So if you add a project with a timeline, there are implications. And those consequences that you talked about, Chris, earlier, is that the public involvement process might be shorter. There are some people in the public that are not going to be happy about that. Yet being accountable for the direction that you gave direction of a certain timeline, and some of them, we don't have a choice. They're they're state mandated, that it impacts this greater process. So that means we're going to do the best we can within a certain timeline to have that public outreach. And so when that city council hearing happens, rather than point fingers at staff not having enough process or the planning commission not having doing a thorough enough job. It's that we're looking at it collectively and we're making the best decisions as both bodies, staff supported, that we can with what we have and where we want to go as a community. So I think being accountable and responsible for actions and working collaboratively together is, I think, a great place to start. Yeah.
Betty?
Oh, thank you. I need to say something about South Willamette since I'm very involved there. I think everybody knew for years that people were talking about Willamette Street. We were talking about making it more walkable and more dense, but people did not at all realize that we're talking about houses, three houses in or a block or in away from Willamette that might be sold and rezoned for apartment buildings. And this was a big shock to people. It was, George Brown and I at the time were the two counselors most involved, and we didn't realize the extent of what might happen until it was sort of last minute. And then people were told they should have known. It was not, I think one way to we do have neighborhoods. We should have more neighborhood newsletters than we have, paid for by the city. And I think if a neighborhood newsletter went out and it said, did you know that your house that houses from here to here might be rezoned to allow more dense housing? Come to a meeting and learn about it. I think people would come. People do read those neighborhood newsletters, and they would tell, if they saw something alarming, they would tell their neighbors about it too. And there have been times, for example, when people thought there was going to be housing in what is now finally safe as the Amazon headwaters, and they learned about it through neighborhoods, and some people then started distributing leaflets around the neighborhood, and there was an uproar. We had a neighborhood meeting that had at least 200 people. A reporter came and said, what's going on? Because people couldn't get inside. They were so excited. They realized what might happen in their own neighborhood. And I think that we should use the neighborhood organizations and the publications more. Thank you.
Planning commissioners. Commissioner, do you mind if I?
No, yeah, go ahead.
Commissioner Ramey?
Thank you. Again, returning to what Commissioner Borofsky was saying, most successful processes I've been involved that were controversial even from the start had clear direction from leadership. This is the scope of the work you're to undertake. This is the goals we're trying to achieve, and this is how it benefits the organization, or in this case, the community. The more clear that was from leadership, and the more able leadership was to reinforce that, the better the process went. Because then there was not a misunderstanding. If people don't know what they're getting into, they assume the worst. And they come to meetings prepared to do battle on that basis. because they're simply not aware. But the best processes were really ones that were clearly defined in ways that the planners participating, the citizens participating, could understand the goal of the project and how, so process how we're going to get there. So certainly leadership needs to step up and say, this is what we would like you to do, and be as specific as you can, because the more specific, the better it is.
Counselors? I guess I'll take a moment to follow up. I think the intention around this meeting and the thought going forward, and part of what I'm taking away here, is for council to hold it that the planning commission are your trusted advisors, and that you're going to trust their process. And our goal here is that we understand that process more and we're more closely connected to it. And part of that is a way of then coming into our decision-making process feeling that we're standing on solid ground and not as vulnerable to those last-minute objections, which are simply a fact of the political landscape. I think we are never going to eliminate that. And so our best efforts to communicate, but to feel that our trusted advisors have given us good advice, we're going to listen to it. If we need clarification, I think Commissioner Borowski's idea of, you can come back for more clarification rather than, go slow to go fast, right? Go slow in the beginning so you can go fast later. That I think that is the critical piece, and that we're trying to get to, that we're not going in a certain direction and then suddenly find ourselves diverted at the last minute by a kind of some sideways process that we didn't prepare for. So,
Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And that kind of goes to one of the things that I'd like to speak about, and that is the public hearing process. I've been to many public hearings, both as planning commissioner and as somebody standing at the mic giving 3 minutes. And I think that the feeling of a public hearing, people stand up, give their 3 minutes, and then we're going to move this on and vote for it, gives a feeling of, why am I even standing in front of the public, giving my 3 minutes? And I think that that's the opportunity where if there's significant public comment at a city council public hearing, that is an appropriate time to send it back to us. When we have our public hearings and then do our deliberations are usually a full meeting long, which is an hour and a half. And if we don't get through it, we'll schedule another one so that we have the time to do the full deliberative public hearing. At city council, a lot of the times the public hearing comes and then it comes up to you guys for action at a further meeting, usually 1 or 2 meetings over, and it's part of a 45-minute work session. So you might get 1 round of deliberation, maybe 2, and then the vote is taken. And that kind of makes some of the people who came out to that public hearing, came out on a Monday night to talk to you guys, and then it's just like, well, this is a foregone conclusion. This is going to get voted on. And I think there are opportunities for further deliberation. And I think that also will help the people who feel disenfranchised, and maybe get more people to come out and give you guys the input that you want.
Mm-hmm. All right, it is council's turn. Any councilors want to speak to that? Any other comments? I'm happy to summarize what my takeaway is so far, and invite anyone else who wants to summarize their takeaway so that we kind of have a plan going forward, a thought that we're going to work on. So, just to start, sort of at the beginning, is who's on the planning commission. I think a thought about more extensive vetting process for selecting candidates is something that's actionable that we should talk about as council, about how we want to do that. I interest a list in the subcommittees that the planning commissioners are working on, so we have that basic information. Interest in wait, I had one down here. Let's see. I think some thoughts about, a somewhat more regular reporting system to council about what's on your sort of immediate work plan and where you are, and hopefully that would help us divert things if we're going to throw something at you that wasn't part of that work plan, but also I would think help us be ahead of the curve a little bit with neighborhood meetings and so on in terms of knowing that. And then exploration about citizen involvement committee, that seems like a longer term thing, but maybe that's a subject for conversation. I think I had noted before in a meeting that we had 9 different public involvement plans going on concurrently, and that seems like a lot. So, maybe there is an overall process of thinking about public involvement. Is there a template for those? How do they cycle? Could there be an overarching group? How might we reconfigure that? So that seems like a future council action to look in that broader picture. We've had some specific ideas about specific kinds of outreach, so that's sort of a subset of that sort of brainstorm about how else we might support the work in terms of outreach. And then there's, I think, the suggestion that council, in a sort of consistent and predictable way, maybe think about how they can send things back to Planning Commission where there seems to be a lot of question, concern about how the code is being interpreted or read, or why. That I think having that in our minds around our schedule seems like it might be valuable.
So there's at least one, and there's probably several, that I would like to, we'll take back the Planning Commission, and that is, Chris brought it up, it was brought up by a few others too, is to, in our decisions and recommendations, to look at and present consequences, whether it's law, to the public, et cetera, because there is, Commissioner Fragola brought it up, just in terms of our at-large position, we are really thinking about the larger, within the confines of state and local regulations. It's adopted plans, right? So if we're looking at a smaller decision, we're looking at Envision Eugene, which was a huge public process that the City Council approved. So it's always within that context of approval from City Council and a huge public process. So being able to explain that more clearly and what the consequences are, I think that's important. I think we can do that. We have consciously in the past not provided a minority vote because it's been thoughtful and intentional. So we'd like to talk about that a little bit more and maybe bring to you some of our thoughts around that. And we can obviously consider shifting that. I think it would be probably important for you to understand why we do what we do now. And it's been a long process of years of feedback. So, and then being able to come to you specifically about that, maybe informally or offline, get some feedback, and then make a presentation of potentially shifting. So commissioners, did you hear anything else that we need to bring up in terms of feedback, follow-up?
I would just, go for it. There we go.
I just want to thank you guys for allowing us to have this meeting. We've been asking for it on the commission for years, to be honest, because we felt there was a disconnect. You guys get an AIS from the Planning Commission, a recommendation from the Planning Commission, and being able to interact with you like this is very helpful to us, and we really appreciate the opportunity of you guys giving this a full hour-and-a-half work session to work with you. I don't know if it has to happen every year, but I think that as efforts go on in the future, a lot of the things that you guys are going to be facing will be interacting with the things that we're facing. Speaking to something that Betty said, all you need to do to get a bunch of people to a neighborhood meeting is to have a land use decision in your neighborhood, and you'll have plenty of people at a neighborhood meeting. So that, again, I just want to thank you for allowing us to come and meet with you. I think it's been very productive, and I hope it's been productive for you guys as well.
I want to thank you all as well because you are all donating your time to the community and to the greater good, and I very much appreciate it. And my own feeling would be I'd love to do this twice a year, actually, especially as we have so many things on the table, because there would be other conversations that we could have subsequent to this, following up on things we've talked about today. Where did we try those things? Where are we with those things? It gives us a check-in, but it also gives us a check-in. There might be some sort of substantive processes that we might want to talk about with some of those bigger issues so that we're clearer on the table. So that would be my preference. It's hard to organize, and I particularly appreciate this is an extra meeting for you on the Planning Commission to attend. So, we might have to accommodate you sometime and come to your regular planning time instead. But that would be my thought. I find it constructive, and I was happy to hear the conversation. So thank you very much.
So I also want to thank you, and I know a lot of, I think of city council is really a volunteer job for the most part as well. So that's really why we're here. So I appreciate Commissioner Borowski saying, allow us to be here. I think we're all here. We all want to contribute to the community. So it goes to kind of Emily, why did you become a city councilor? Why are we all sitting here? So we want our time to be valuable. We do volunteer a lot of times. So while we've wanted to meet for so long, it is, thank you, Mayor, it's about trust, is that we will, Planning Commission as a committee, as a commission, is willing to shift. How can we best serve the community and best serve the city council? Because ultimately we're basically enacting either already something approved or to be approved that you've given direction, unless it's a quasi-judicial action, which in essence is also city council because you've approved the code. You approve the development standards. So that's really our objective. And so we just want to be the best that we can be and serve the community well. So thank you, everyone, for being here today. Yeah.
And I think that brings us to a close. So I adjourn the city council meeting. You can adjourn yours.
Thank you.
Adjourn the planning commission meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, Alan, for calling in.